Welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited to have a very special guest today. This is going to be a really good conversation because I think coming into being that we're in the new year, just talking about health, wellness, and staying on top of things, I cannot wait to get into this with my guest, Miss Elena. So introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you before we dive head into this conversation.
Sure. So I've spent the last 14 plus years in kind of different roles, really under the bucket of talent development, talent management. So I've started my career in higher education, then transitions toward corporate learning, started a couple of businesses along the way in coaching and just kind of L&D consulting, like learning and development consulting, and performance. And along the way, and having come from a family of athletes, I've always known that health and wellness is so much more than just necessarily the physical aspect of it. And so I started to kind of build up on that. So, and we'll dive into that, I'm sure, today, but I've kind of recognized that when it comes to talent development, talent management, performance in organizations, it's much more than just like, what's the job that you're doing, right? Like that's like what we focus on a lot. And then starting to incorporate all these other kind of more holistic areas around us as human beings, what we need to thrive in organizations. So I love this topic. I live and breathe personal professional development. I'm that annoying person who loves what she does every day. Maybe not maybe not all day, but definitely every day. But it took me a lot to get here. I always tell the story of like I had 17 jobs before I turned 25 years old. So like I've done like the experimenting and like I know exactly what I don't want to do, which allowed me to then create a career path and a business where I do really enjoy what I do. And I think all of us listening to this are able to do the same. So that's kind of my mission and purpose for now. Let's see. I don't know what's going to happen in a couple of years, but that's where I'm at right now.
Well, I am super excited. And, for people who may be new to the show, our backgrounds are very similar in the sense that I haven't done exactly the same path, but I've done very similar in just doing a lot of different things and finding just a true passion in helping people figure out how to show up better. And what I love a lot about what you were talking about is that I feel like when we talk about health and wellness, we really zero in on the physical component of it. My first thought is I sit too much every day and, these things about you got to get out and go walk. But I firmly feel that we underestimate the mental component of health and wellness and how that actually impacts our ability to not only be engaged and healthy, but also really do our jobs to the best of our ability and whether or not people ultimately stay with their companies. So I just give me some thoughts on that. Let's talk about the mindset component.
Yeah, I think that's such a big one. And I'm a recovering person recovering from a lot of challenges with confidence, a lot of self-limiting beliefs, a lot of self-doubt, and so on. And so what's interesting is that, and a client told me this the other day, you don't know how bad you feel especially from like that self-belief, mindset piece until you feel better and until you start to see that change. So you don't recognize how deeply mindset impacted you until you actually get out of that mindset, get out of that hole that you're in, and you feel better. And you're like, oh my God, like, did I just waste all these years, like thinking in X, Y, and Z ways? And it can cover different things: confidence, self-limiting beliefs. It can competence, whatever you want to call it. Like all of us have some kind of inner chatter that really impacts it. And sometimes it's our inability to manage change. Like if we're talking about organizations, like for people in organizations, right? Like the inability to manage change. And now I think I'm going to go in a rabbit hole, but stop me in a second. Mindset, because I want to tie in mindset to, there's a physical aspect to it, but also just to like health practices. What I mean by that is that usually we feel anxious, emotionally triggered, also partially because of the food that we eat, how well we sleep, and our environment.
Yeah.
And I think that impacts mindset more than like even the self-limiting beliefs. I think both kind of impact, but we can uncover that a little bit more. So when we're thinking about just performance and talent in organizations, I think we're missing a big piece of data and information around mindset and how people perform when we ignore these other pieces of what it means to be a human being, which is all the, kind of the things that I mentioned. So
No, I agree with you. I mean, it's and I feel like it's evolving so quickly, and I'd like to take credit as a Gen Xer that it's really our influence in like the marketplace. But this idea, like I feel like when I started my career some odd years ago, I'm older than I ever want to admit that I am. But when I remember when I first started, it was here's your job description. This is what you do. Go do your job. It's production, production, production. And nobody really cared if you were super happy or not. Like, I don't remember doing a lot of engagement surveys in the beginning of my career. It was more of you're getting compensated to do this. It's almost like that Mad Men clip. Like, your pay is your reward for doing a job well done. And I
Mhm.
feel like we have shifted very within just a couple of decades significantly to really focusing in on a healthy to be a successful company, a truly productive company, a sustainable company. We have to care about a lot more than just are people doing their jobs. We care about how they're doing, how they feel, how they're showing up, and like almost that holistic approach versus just the myopic approach.
Mhm.
But I like that you even tied diet into it. Because it's so true.
Mhm.
Like because I used to, so back in the day, many years ago, I ran a half marathon. And it was
Nice.
a long time ago. It was something that a friend of mine and I came up with. And the next morning after the drinks wore off, I was too embarrassed to say I wasn't going to do it. So I did it. But what I would say is the thing I learned the most in that period of time, and again, it kind of almost ties to your athleticism, your family being athletes, was that experience taught me that your body is like an engine, and what you put in definitely affects what comes out in the sense of energy product, like how you're able to move and think. And I also learned that my mindset about what my body could do was also could be a very self-limiting factor. Because if I didn't think I could run that distance, there's no way I could have run the distance. Like you start to really understand the game that your mind plays in
Mhm.
how successful you can be. Again, like you talked about a recovering self-doubter, or how I think the other term that comes up a lot is imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
But the reality comes down to it is what you ingest versus your thoughts, who's around you. Physically, food has a huge factor in what you actually put out and how you show up in your world.
Mm. You know what's interesting? Actually, I didn't tie the 2 points until you just said it out loud. But you mentioned you're a Gen X. I'm an elderly millennial, so I'm right there behind you. And
We'll claim you. It's okay.
I'll take some of the credit too. So we grew up in a very different time. So what I mean by that, we first of all, at that time, whoever you hung out with, like that's your example of what a career should be like the level of satisfaction. So like everybody was kind of living the same life, and you're like, no, I'm just doing my job, it's fine. And then since then, we obviously social media and access to information, all those things came out, and it's like, wait a minute, like now younger generations are growing up, even us looking, you're like, so there's a different way I can do this, and then there's also access to all these learnings online, all the access to just opportunities to learn and upskill yourself and educate yourself further versus just regular traditional institutions, universities we used to go to, right?
Yeah.
So I think that has definitely accelerated this change in the workforce that we see and how we associate what we do with kind of the companies that we work with, because we start to see a different point of view. That's number one. I think another piece is going back to the diet aspect, is that the food supply has just significantly went down down the hill,
Yeah.
since over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah.
So, just that, access to healthier foods is harder, it's more expensive, and so on. And it's depending on where you are and your income level and where you are on a social economic level, sometimes I mean, it's not even an option. I'll give you an example here locally. My boyfriend and I think it was like last year, we were driving through a neighborhood in Maryland, and it was more like, a neighborhood of just more of like a low socioeconomic ladder. And you could see like on every corner, it was like fast food, a liquor store, a quick stop, like, junk kind of food store and so on. And there was like no healthy options in sight versus you go to like a nicer part of DC and you have like your Whole Foods and you have this organic store and this
Trader
and that.
Joe's and
Trader Joe's and
this
like,
and that.
from farm to table, right? Type thing. So I think there is a larger, which I don't want to get into that, but I think there's a larger kind of systemic issue that we're dealing with, and it's just getting worse. So that's park that aside. I think what for sure we see is that we're more anxious and more uh, leading to that burnout because we also have so much information coming to our way, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I think statistically, I don't remember the exact number, but it's like huge number, like more than 60% of one that people, the first thing they do when they wake up is they're like in front of their phones. So you have all this influx of all this information before you even start your day, and your mind, like you said, it's like a vessel, right? Like your body's that the vessel, you need to put nutrients in it, and that includes the information that comes in. So if you're waking up and you're looking at like we're at war here, this is bad, this somebody got shot, this person is so happy they're, I don't know, on a vacation, and what am I doing with my life type thing. This person's loving their career, this person looks like they lost weight, and I'm over here just stuffing my face. So it's like all this information that's coming our way, that's we're starting our day off on a negative note. So then we go into a workplace, and
Yeah.
then with all of that garbage in the back of our minds, which we don't recognize, but our eyes see it. And our eyes, whatever scroll we did on that Instagram or on YouTube, it registered. Kimberly, it went
Yes.
somewhere. And it's probably just parked in the back of your head, so that when something happens at work, it triggers a thought, and that thought comes from completely ridiculous thing that you might have watched that has nothing to do with you, but now we've internalized it. So it's like
Yep.
this whole like snowball effect. So I think to your point, like growing up, I think the way you and I grew up, like I mean, way before social media. I mean, I look at kids these days, and I'm like, I hadn't like when I was 14, I was like the most clueless. I was a kid. I was like an 8-year-old compared to today's
Yeah.
14-year-olds. And I think that has something to do with it. And a final point here is also the social aspect. When we were growing up, I don't know about you, but we would play on the street. We would go ride bikes. We would
Yeah.
go play with the neighbors and the community and the neighborhood. So the social piece is there. And today, again, contributing to that mindset is the isolation, is the loneliness. It's a pandemic that is growing. I'm reading a great book. It's called the death of despair, and it talks about the suicide rates of particularly they're talking about men between
Yeah.
ages of 35 to 45 or something like that, or 45 to 54, I forget exactly, that are just due to a lot of it's due to that loneliness, substance abuse, and so on. But the core of it is that we're disintegrating as a society on social aspects. So again, a little bit different topic, but I think it's important to understand when we think about humans and organizations, like all these things we're dealing with.
So I kind of want to, okay, lots in there. So what, but some of the things that I think are important, especially when we talk about leadership. So one of the things I loved was the fact that everything you take in. So I like when you said, because I am guilty, I've done it too, where I will have my phone by my bed and I'll pick it up just to see what notifications came through. But what you said is very meaningful because if you do this every day and you're filling yourself with a lot of anxious information, a lot of angry information, because our brains, we are very wired to hold on to negative, more negative, I would say emotions than the good ones, right? So to your point, we're going to hold on to what makes us anxious, what makes us feel less than. I liked when you said that. Well, she looks great. Like, or when I love LinkedIn, but I also hate LinkedIn a little bit because it's the same thing in your professional life as it is in your personal life on, say, like a Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, whatever, is that people are only going to post the stuff that's good,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're rarely going to come out and say, I had a shit day at work. They're not going to come and talk about where they're struggling, right? Because they don't want to look weak. You don't want to look like you don't have your shit together. But what I would say is when you think about the cumulative impact that has on people of I'm not as good as somebody else. What am I doing with my career? Everyone else seems to have it more together than me. The world feels like it's falling apart. From your perspective, because your experience is in the health and wellness component, right? I think that is probably a more honest description of what is happening with 90% of people, whether they realize it is or not.
Mm-hmm.
That before they even step foot or start the first thing they do at work in that day, they're holding on to a whole lot of heavy stuff. So, what in your experience, how do you start to combat that? So we're not starting our day. Like I'm assuming you're going to say, don't look at your phone. But I mean, bigger than that, because again, you think this has been going for decades. This is cumulative now. It's not like you just don't look at your phone one day and it gets better. So what would you advise people to start doing? What are some habits that people should think about changing?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a great question. And by the way, I'm still guilty of looking at my phone. Like my boyfriend, I was like, "Stop looking at your phone." Like I saw you look at your phone this much. So we still, so it's
Yeah.
impossible to be perfect by any means. Like I
Yeah.
mean, when I talk about this, I'm equally as guilty about a lot of those things. But I think awareness is like recognizing you like, okay, I've literally picked up my phone and it's 5 a.m. Like, what am I doing? Like this should not be. So I think just awareness number one. And that awareness comes from the biggest pain point in your life or career at the moment, in your life, because life is career, career is life, like it's all connected. There's no silos, in my opinion. And so I think just recognizing what is the biggest pain point, because you got to start somewhere, and it's impossible to tackle everything. It's, I can tell you and like you should do this, and you should work out, and you should drink more water, and you should, but it's like impossible. Like we're human beings. Like change is difficult. Whenever what's interesting is that our brain perceives change as a threat. So our brains, like just our human biology, our brain's job is to protect us. And the way it protects us is it protects our energy, and then it keeps us away from danger. And so when we think change, when we have to change something, why it's so difficult? Because it activates that fear in our brain. Like, wait a minute, like I don't want to change. This is scary. I'm comfortable where I am because we've developed these set of habits that work quite well for us. And by the time you're 35 years old, 95% of your habits are developed. You're set. Everything you do is the same. The way you think, the way you communicate, what you do each day, day in, day out, it's the same. By the time you're 35, right? Which that goes to the saying of like, it's impossible to teach an old dog new tricks. It is possible, but it has become difficult because you've been conditioned and think in a certain way for a longer period of time. So
Yeah.
baby steps is where it works. Awareness, number one. You got to have the internal motivation to actually make a change, which is why I go back to the pain points, right? What in your life, in your career, for example, that's not working right now.
Yeah.
So, and looking at that, and then just looking at like, what are the behaviors and actions that you do each day that could be potentially impacting that? And so if we look at some of the basics, which I mean, my favorite part and what I see work a lot with clients is going back to the basics. And we miss those basics, which is the physical, the mindset, some of the things we're talking about, the social piece, the career fulfillment, and the nutrition. So if we just look at the basics, and we're just starting with health because it's everything. You can be, you can have a success, I don't know how to explain, but you can have, I don't know, you can have all the money in the world, right? But if you're not healthy, none of that matters, right?
Yeah.
So I think something that I keep going back and forth and is the meditation piece. And because it allows to bring that awareness, I think that's the hardest part. The reason that we go into the negative spiral because it's easier, Kimberly. It's easier than bringing awareness to actually the shit that we need to unpack. And meditation is where it helps. And I used to go into kind of discussions. I've had people on my podcast and we talk about meditation, and there's different types of meditation. People say, well, working out is meditation for me, or walking meditation is meditation for me, which could be true. But I think there's also something around sitting quietly, whether it's a guided meditation or whatever, but not moving and just kind of sitting in that stillness that has a lot more power than if you were working out, because then you're still distracted. And the key to meditation is to bring awareness to your thoughts. I go back
Mhm.
and forth in meditation. I've mentioned to you, I just came back from Bali, so it inspired me to get back to meditation. I mean, I
Yeah.
had to spend a lot of money to inspire myself, obviously, to go all the way to Bali. But nonetheless, and I see an impact already. And every time I get back into meditation, I'm like, it's so impactful because I'm
Yeah.
also unpacking my own things, right? So I think, even if you pick up that phone in the morning, that's okay. Like we're all do it, it's fine. But then what is it that you're doing in your morning that allows you to create space for that change to happen? And
Yeah.
then meditation could be part of it. Maybe it's just going for a walk. Maybe it's just stretching your body. So whatever your habits are right now, start incorporating something different so that you start to rewire your brain to start your day on a more I don't know, pathway, so to say,
Hmm.
to do something different. That's the case. You have to change something. You have to do something different for something to
Yeah.
change. If you keep doing the same thing, if you don't create space for new habits and new routines, nothing will change, right? So I think number one, that's that. Um, I can spend hours on just the physical aspect, but I think just the two most important things I'll mention here is the sleep. Sleep is so important, and I know, of course, there's a lot of people who struggle with just certain, challenges where they can't sleep, medications, and so on. But I think, if you are to spend time anywhere, is your sleep, because that's where neuroplasticity happens. That's how when your brain rewires itself. That's when change happens. So whenever you are actually waking up and trying to implement those different new habits, that change actually solidifies when you sleep. So if you don't actually tie in habit creation with proper quality sleep, it's very difficult to make it sticky. So the way our brain rewires when we sleep, the way it rests, the all the junk that goes out of your brain, like all the stuff that you incorporate throughout the day, it actually, I forget the process exactly, but your brain actually like does its own cleansing when it sleeps. And if you're not getting, especially in that REM sleep, and if you're not getting quality sleep, you're not getting rid of all those toxic thoughts, and then you just
Interesting.
waking up, yeah, and then you're waking up, I forget the term for it, but then you're waking up and with that same trash in your head, and then you're
Mm.
exhausted on top of that, and then you're craving sugar, you're not able to be focused, and you're not as creative, and there's a lot of research associated with lack of sleep and not being at your top performance. That's a fact for everybody. That's just pure science, right? So I think auditing your sleep is really, really important. And there's I think Dr. Matthew Walker, he's like the sleep guy. Looking into his research, I'm not an expert in it, but that's where I would start, right? And then just bring an awareness on to what needs to change. I'll pause here.
Yeah, so a couple things. So for all my perimenopausal women out there, sleep is
Mm-hmm.
hard.
Mm-hmm.
But I think going back to what you're talking about is you have to be aware of what is happening with you and your body. So when you were talking, one of the things that I do, a tactic that I have, that if I feel that my anxiety levels are higher than they normally are, the first thing I do is I go into my phone and I set the parental controls on all my social media, like to very little. 30 minutes a day, that's it. And when I run out, I'm out. And I could go and give myself more time, but I don't.
Mm.
Because like so I force myself into change, like, but sometimes I don't notice it immediately. So like when you talk about what are you doing differently? Like for me, that's an example that if anybody wants to use, feel free to use it. But I find that the less I engage in stuff that maybe isn't helping me feel better about myself, or that is allowing me to spiral, or more importantly, distract me from what I need to focus on. So, because one of the things I have found, and I think this is universal, because I see it in young kids, I see it in old, like every generation, is that when we fill our lives full of social media and whatever it is, we are straight up distracting ourselves. I think we have become very uncomfortable with the idea of sitting alone with our thoughts. We have become very uncomfortable with the concept of boredom. Like it's almost this need to be entertained, or that, for some people, it's if I'm not engaging, then I'm missing out, almost like the FOMO syndrome. But I think the opposite is what needs to happen. The more you feel that, that's probably an indication you need to engage less. And because again, to meditate, the reason I've had some people be very resistant to the idea of even just sitting for 2 minutes is that they could not handle it, because they just were like, God, they could not handle the flow of thought that went through their minds. It made them feel crazy because they needed to be doing something. And I feel like that is a huge component to with wellness that we don't talk about. Is we fill our lives with a lot of stuff to distract us from what we really should be doing and what we really should be working on. Because, if I'm distracted by those things, then I don't have to deal with my own crap.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my thought when I was thinking about that, is I feel like a lot of this stuff is wonderful distraction.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it actually helps us be better and healthier humans at the end of it. I feel like it's entertainment, but we've taken it beyond entertainment into something that is creating like incredibly anxious, incredibly depressive, just beasts of doing, and not really not really like just being, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned something really important, and is this inability to be uncomfortable or like just like wanting to face ourselves. And when we're looking at social media, when we're staying busy, what we're doing is we're faking connection. It's like, oh, well, I don't, I'm good. Like, I read up on this and maybe, and I looked at social media. So we felt like we connected with other people. We kind of lived through them, right? But you didn't really establish any connections with people. So we're not only are we uncomfortable with ourselves, but we're getting more uncomfortable being around other people. Like we're not even intentionally, even, I mean, how many times you go to dinner? I mean, and you see people sitting around and just looking at their phones. We
Yeah.
forgot how to even connect with not with our just with ourselves, but also with each other. Because when we look at social media, we're like, oh, I see, oh, Kimberly is traveling, cool. I feel like I connected with her instead of like, hey, Kimberly, what's going on? Like, let's have a
Tell me
chat.
about your trip.
Tell me
And
about your
like
trip.
actually having the conversation
And
about the trip versus just liking, hearting
exactly, and feeling
whatever
like
the
you've
photos
engaged.
on an app. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree with you on that.
And so I think it's like faking that connection, but it's like faking to ourselves also.
Yeah.
Like we. And the other part is we're also, and this is I mean this is a true story of myself. Addiction to cortisol. So we are
Mm.
addicted to continuously having something going on because we need it. And I'm a recovering person like that. I'm known as a doer, and I recently posted about this, and I was like, I just don't want to be a doer anymore. And I've always associated me doing and accomplishing and producing with my self-worth.
Yeah.
And when I
Well,
uncovered,
but to in all to not to like take you like completely off the hook, but
yeah,
that is American culture.
yes,
Like we are a productivity culture. And if you like the idea of I'm just going to go for a walk, but if I'm not going for a walk and listening to my audiobook or listening to my podcast or catching up with somebody because it's the only, we are addicted to this idea of productivity. So it's not just you, my friend. It is,
yeah.
I believe this is a cultural phenomena. So I don't want you to feel too badly about it.
Thank you. I feel slightly better. I actually do, but
I see you. I see you.
thank you. I think to your point, like I think whether it's culturally, whether it's environment, whatever it may be, I think that definitely plays a role. The other day, I was having a chat with a guest on my podcast, and he kind of came to the same conclusion. He was like I just, and he has 5 kids, and so he was like, I just want to be more present for my kids and my wife and my family and so on. And he said my goal in life and what he's accomplished up to this point, and he wants to continue, is he said to make the most amount of money doing the least amount of work.
Yeah.
And like he has a business and so he's doing well. And I'm like, what a concept, And the first thing, and when he said that, first of all, I was like one, that sounds great, but then the little voice in the back of my head was like, but then how is that possible? And like, what am I doing with the rest of my time? To your point, maybe just being, maybe just spending time with family, maybe just traveling, maybe just, I don't know, reading a book that it does not have to do anything with professional development, maybe just reading a fiction book, which I never do. I always do nonfiction books because I'm just like always, I need continuous stimulation and like learning or something.
Yeah.
It's a problem. But, and I think just reframing our mindset, and understanding that we don't have to always do that it's not tied to your, and for me
It's not
personally,
tied to your value.
yes. But for me also, for me it came from, and maybe some people can relate to this. Part of it has been accelerated by the culture, by the being in America. But part of it is also when I was growing up, I never got good grades. I barely, I changed my major 5 times. It took me 6 years to get my bachelor's. I always felt like I was behind. So
Mm.
for me, that stems from that, I think. Like if I were to just psychoanalyze myself, like I feel like that maybe stems from that, is that I always
Yeah.
feel like I had to catch up. So and so on. But then I'm like, but I caught up, and like I've outrun, you know what I mean? What I
Yeah.
what I was what I was my wildest dream type thing, like I'm, to where I am today, right? Like I got what I was looking for. Like I'm good,
Yeah.
now it's looking at the next level and so on. But the point is that like you don't need to always do, and it's not tied to your value. And I think that's a lot. I think especially, and I don't know, maybe this sounds sexist, but I think for women it's even worse. I think for women we are more harsher on ourselves
Oh, yeah.
in that way. I think we're more self-critical than our male counterparts.
I would also say, and I say this because I am surrounded by amazing women who are mothers, but man, the things that mothers like, the influence of social media, Pinterest and Instagram on the what women think they have to do to be a good mother scares
Mm,
the bejesus out of me. Um, and it's the anti, but I think it's like I said, I think it's a conditioning because it wasn't like this when I was a kid. Like I didn't like I constantly look back and think something has shifted culturally and societally. Because
yeah.
when I was a kid, I would get kicked outside and go told to play outside. And there was no scheduled play date. Like sometimes I remember just sitting in my backyard with a piece of paper and a pencil, and I was not an artist, but I thought I could be one if I practiced hard enough. And I would just draw my dog, and it was never good. But I mean, but it was the idea like it wasn't like for an outcome. Whereas I
Yeah.
feel like now so much stuff of what we do and it's tied to some level of productivity. Are we making enough friends? Are we getting enough social interaction? Are we heaven forbid are we taking that hobby and turning it into, a side hustle and I just feel like there's something like we have taken the idea of we have made just being and enjoying time with other people or enjoying something we do. Like I'm a pretty average, low average knitter, but like to sit there and just enjoy doing it for the sake of just doing it, not because I need to get better, not because I need to it's just,
Mm-hmm.
we really have like crammed that into like, that's not a good use of your time.
Mm,
Because I've even again, I'm a recovering person as well. And so I will find myself thinking, well, this is lazy. I'm just being lazy. But I'm not
yeah.
saying it in a positive sense of, oh man, I really needed just a day to just be. I find myself and I try to always catch it, is when I say it, it's usually got a negative connotation. I can't believe I just sat here and watched two movies back to back. God, that was so lazy. I have so many things on my list I could have done. I mean, I could
Mm,
have worked out while I watched the movie, and I could have done this, and I could have done that. But I mean, it ties to the exact same thing of there's a. I think we just need to be a lot kinder to ourselves and one, be aware of the fact that we don't have to be that busy in order to have value. We don't
mm-hmm.
have to be that busy in order to be productive. Going back to that gentleman, I want to work the least amount to be able to live the life that I value. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
his value, it's the life he values. So it's almost
Mm-hmm.
flipping it on its head. I feel like that's where I'm trying to get to is like there's a life I value and how do I use the skills and the gifts that I have in order to create the life I value? And it doesn't matter how busy I am.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally in that life I'm not that busy. I want to have
Yeah.
a more enjoyable relaxed existence, but it's funny because in my day to day I don't value that. It's like the dream versus the reality. I can make that dream a reality, but I have to value it.
Mm. I think also, I think just for clarification purposes, I think it's important to point out that when you are at a stage where you can make, when you can create that lifestyle and not work as much, I think there still needs to be that you had to have certain experience, a certain hustle, and certain part of
Yeah.
your life. Like you got to get to that point because I don't want people listening to be like, oh, like no, like that person obviously he's able to do it because he has a set of skills that then allows him to produce less
Yeah.
but then monetize more. So I think that's important to clarify. So I think there is a level of kind of work that you need to do in order to get there. But then when
Fair.
you get there, recognizing that you're there and you don't have to do at the same level, at the same speed, at the same busyness. I think when you're in your 20s, it's fair. Like, listen, hustle, do your thing, work, experiment, etc. But then
Yep.
like hopefully by the time you reach like mid 30s, you should be like, okay, I think I kind of got it, like maybe. And obviously life happens and sometimes it's a roller coaster and it is what it is. But generally speaking, you would hopefully you're kind of in a little bit more stable environment. And something I heard of, I can't even give credit, I forget who it was, but I think a number of people talk about is to not feel guilty about watching that Netflix, scheduling it. Scheduling the Saturday, I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah.
Saturday, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to feel guilty about it because I scheduled that time in and I'm not going to think about my to-do list. I'm not going to think about the things that I should be doing. I'm not going to think about working out. I'm not going to think about eating healthy today. I'm just going to my cheat day from all sides. And just scheduling that in, I think will quiet down that self-critic in our heads. That works for me at least.
Well, and what I like about that though is it's a step process to helping you. So if you become aware, like I just mentioned, that these are the thoughts that will play out in your head, and then to prevent the spiral of like feeling badly about yourself, which is just ridiculous. But we do it. But I love the concept of you can create like steps to get you to a healthier place. No differently than like I'll put limits on my social media, or I will put limits on until I feel like that's not something that my brain is wanting me to engage with.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
that's fascinating. Well, I just want to say this has been a very fun conversation. I'm loving this. But I want to be respectful of your time. So for all of our listeners out there, when we think about health and wellness, and I know we've talked a great deal about mindset today and just kind of the mental component about showing up as a healthier you, what would be maybe your final thought or a key takeaway for our listeners as they navigate their day-to-day challenges in existence?
I would just audit. I would audit those 5 areas and see which one you need to really start with. So I would look into your physical health, your mindset, your social interactions, like with other people, where you are in your career, and then also the nutrition piece. So I think I would just audit those 5 areas, which makes us, either really great at our performance and just happy, whole human beings, or usually when we're feeling off, though one of those 5 things or multiple things are usually off. And I think it's unrealistic to go after all 5 at the same time, but just auditing where is the biggest pain point for you? Like, is it that you're just completely miserable at work and you wake up and you're just dreading having to go to work? Is it that you're waking up completely exhausted because you're just not sleeping and maybe that's what you need to address? Is it that you feel lonely, and alone because you maybe you moved to a new city, or maybe, I don't know, you just went through some kind of life change, or maybe you just haven't talked to your friends and you haven't
Yeah.
touched it, like having that social interaction, whatever that biggest pain point is, like being really real with yourself, writing all these, I think writing it helps as well, like putting these buckets onto a piece of paper in front of you and being really real around, I mean, even rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, right? 5 being, I'm killing it in this area, to 1 is like, uh-oh, we're in danger zone, right? Beyond danger zone. And just ranking it and then
Yeah.
looking at your lowest score and then spending time in that bucket and then moving to the next bucket and the next bucket. And as you do that, you'll create a set of habits to help you get to that 5 and or maybe a 4. No, we're not looking for perfection, right? Like there's always room for improvement, myself included. And then just kind of looking at that, I think that's where we need to, because then that makes it for you, it's tailored for you, what's right for your life, for your choices, what's important to you, auditing that, and just, and you don't need anybody to do it, just you, yourself, and you.
Well, I think that's brilliant, and I like that. So if anybody is listening to you and is like, "Hey, I'd like to learn more about you, maybe work with you," where would you want them to find you?
LinkedIn is probably the best area, and I feel the same way about LinkedIn as you do. So and now I'm like, should I put something else? But no, LinkedIn is probably the best. I always check my messages,
Well,
so
LinkedIn
just
is still great, but it's like I'm finding more and more it's becoming the Instagram of professional life of like, oh wow, they did that, man. It's on my bucket list too. And like, I'm like,
yeah.
again, you can't compare yourself to someone else's journey. If that would be
Hmm.
my final thought for this is stick with yourself. Pay attention to your own path. But just thank you so much. And we will have your contact information, everything in the show notes. Just thank you so much for joining me today. And, who knows, might have you back again. We'll talk about some more fun stuff.
Thank you.